Hello, my bookish friends. Welcome or welcome back. I am Elizabeth. This is Reading Wryly, and today we're going to talk about all of the books that I read in October. This is a reading wrap-up. I read 8 books in October. 5 of them I read in a single reading vlog, which was like my Halloween reading vlog. This was comprised of books that I have been holding off reading until spooky season because I felt like it was just something told me I needed to read them at this time of year. I rated them as far as how scary they were and as far as how aptly they fit into reading in, autumnal season. If you're interested in that, I will link that above and below. Go check that out as well. I'm going to go ahead and put all of my other social medias over here. Feel free to connect on those platforms. Also, I will break up this video into chapters so it is easier for you to navigate as usual. Of the 8 books that I read this month, 4 of them were in the 3-star range, but 3 is the lowest rated. So we had a pretty successful month in my opinion, although I did have 1 DNF, which I'm not counting in these 8, but I'll tell you about that as well. And then 3 of those books were in the 4-star range, and I had 1 5-star, overwhelmingly 5-star. I'm going to start with my lowest rated and work my way up to the highest rated of the month. So let's go ahead and get into these books. First of all, I want to tell you about the book that I DNF'd. Unfortunately, that was Leech by Hiron Ennis. I've heard horror, I have heard kind of sci-fi twist, and that is right up my alley. That feels like it should work for me.
But it didn't.
I read 25% of this book and I was ultimately so incredibly confused, completely disconnected. My brain actively repelled this story. I could not continue in good faith. Like, I was just mad that I was reading this. So I had to just take a deep breath, even though I have FOMO, and just say, you know what, I'm going to put this one down, which I did. The concept of this, I still don't really understand, but it's set in this kind of Baron's castle, so it's old-timey. The Baron's doctor is either dead or has gone away and is being replaced with a new doctor. This doctor, we have no description of their gender, of their, physicality at all, what they look like, which I think may have contributed to the fact that I just couldn't get into it because I couldn't picture it in my head. From what I understand, this doctor is a host of a parasite, and the goal of these parasites, or this parasite, is to infiltrate all of the doctors in the world. That's kind of the extent of my knowledge of this. It was told in first person present tense because I was getting the voice of this parasite and not knowing how to picture anything in my mind. I think it just separated me from the story and I really had a hard time getting into it. So I had to put this one down. So I'm not going to dwell on that one for too long. Let's go ahead and get into the books that I did finish and that I did enjoy. The first 3-star book that I want to talk to you about is Kill Creek. This is by Scott Thomas, and I read this in the vlog that I was telling you about earlier. This is focused on this house. It's called the Finch House, or the House on Kill Creek. It is notoriously the most haunted house in this rural Kansas town. In this story, we are following 4 authors, which I love. Love, love, love when I get a fictional novel about authors. Among those authors are Sam McGarver, who teaches Gothic horror. He hasn't written a book in 2 years. He's got some trauma that he's dealing with from his past, and he's having trouble writing and being sincere in his writing while also not facing those things in his past. We're also following T.C. Moore, who is the only female author in this group. She writes horror stories that are, like I said, that unhinged female POV, that has some kinky stuff with demons and a lot of weird stuff going on. She's, of course, got her own cult following. All 4 of these authors are said to be staples of modern horror literature. And then we're also following Daniel Slaughter. Daniel Slaughter is a YA horror author who has just a vast amount of books that he's written. He is also a family man and a Christian, so that comes into play with his character. He is at odds with his faith, or I should say his community of faith. He's not at odds. He thinks that every horror story amounts to everything is good or evil and good always wins, but his community kind of feels like he's dabbling in the occult. And then lastly, we are following Sebastian Cole, who is this really prolific older writer, the Stephen King of the crew, if you will, who is just sage and wise, and everybody here, all of these other authors, are just in awe of his presence, especially Sam McGarver, who is greatly influenced by Sebastian. All four of these authors are brought together for a publicity stunt at the house on Kill Creek by this other man named Wainwright and his girlfriend Kate. I still don't really understand. He owns this company, kind of a social platform, and he wants to interview them in this house, and he wants them to spend the night and record it. Now, what I didn't know going into this is that that portion of this, like this book, is not just set that night. In fact, the whole second half of this book and the juice, the meaty bits of this, happen after that night when something follows them home from this place. The way this haunting presents itself definitely lends to take this book into a different subgenre of horror in general. Like, it's not your typical canon haunting story. So don't go into it with that expectation. Just let it take you where it takes you, and I think you would enjoy this. I do think that this is going to be best for fans of Stephen King. Some people really, really love this book, and some people don't care for it. I have heard criticisms of the way that T.C. Moore, the female author, is shown, the way that she's described, having been from the perspective of a man, that seems really obvious. Also, one of these characters is overweight, and there are details and descriptions that can also be construed as fat shaming. So if those are sensitive subjects for you, you probably won't like this. If I were to have a comp title for this one, it would be It by King. Like, that is very similar. There's this group of people come together. They're not necessarily a friend group, but they are connected in that they are all horror authors, and they have to defeat this extreme big bad. The whole kind of them being on live television for this interview was a cool aspect, but it's a very, very small part of this actual story. So don't necessarily go into it just for that either. However, I do think if you are a fan of overly descriptive detail like King's, this one was a little bit dense for me at times, I will say. It was a little bit dense, it was a little bit wordy, but generally I can see the merit in this. I see why people who love this do love this, and I see why people who hate this do hate this. Hence, this is in the middle of the road for me, and I'm giving it 3 stars. All right, the next book that I want to talk to you about is The Laws of the Skies. This is by Gregoire Courtois. This is a novella. It is 148 pages, super easy to just knock out in one sitting. I did listen to the audio for this one as well as all of these. I think some of them I read along with the book, but it's to be assumed that I'm listening via audio. And in this story, we're following 12 6-year-olds who go off into the woods with their teacher and 2 chaperones who are parents of the children to do like a camping trip, like a weekend camping trip, and they never return. That is not a spoiler. That is literally in the description. No one returns. So we know this is going to be chaos. Okay, and it is. I have read some other reviews that say this is
the bleakest, the most disturbing, the darkest
book they have ever read. It wasn't that for me, but I also had a hard time believing that these characters were actually 6-year-olds. Having a 7-year-old, I just don't believe that they would react that way. I don't think that they would have that sense of composure, the sense of survival, the skills, and granted, they didn't have that great of skills because none of them returned, but still, the way they went about it just felt a little off for me. So that's a big part of the reason that I didn't take this to heart. It didn't give me that visceral feeling that I was anticipating, just because I was a little bit separated from it from the beginning. A lot of people compare this book to Lord of the Flies, and it does turn into like a Lord of the Flies situation. One thing that I did like about the way this is told is that when we first get into the story, their teacher, I think Fred is his name, is telling the kids a story over the campfire about this mouse. And this mouse just really admired birds and wanted to fly, wanted more than anything to fly. And so she starts stretching her body out every day, trying to create these wings so that she can fly among the birds in the sky. And it's really like a really beautiful story of her overcoming adversities, essentially. Once this mouse learns to fly, it then meets this seagull who then teaches her the laws of the skies, hence the title. That story, within the story, becomes a parallel for the actual story itself and these children. So we're learning these rules, and in this case it's the laws of the woods. First of all, I think a lot of people are disturbed by this because they are so young, all of these children, and there are these terrible, devastating, grotesque things happening to them. There were several plot points in this that started off and I thought it was going to go somewhere and it didn't. So I was really confused about that, about some of these characters and why we even brought up these specific elements of their lives or people that they knew. There's one woman who gets really sick at the beginning, and the other chaperone's husband comes to pick her up. I don't understand why that was ever the case, and that turns into a whole thing. Another thing that was a little bit strange was that there are no breaks really in the POVs, especially in the audiobook. It kind of bleeds into the next character, and I don't know if that's intentional or not. I am interested to see if in the physical book there are breaks between those POVs, because it just felt so seamless in the audiobook, and so that was a little bit hard to decipher. It did make me, as the reader, feel like I was questioning a sense of, what perspective I was reading from, where I was, who I was at what point in time. And so, it was a little bit discombobulating. I don't know if that was intentional or not. Now, it does get gorier and gorier as the story goes on. In fact, the last 10 pages, 8 or 10 pages or so, are the most brutal of any in this book. It ends in this very much like this climax of blood and guts and gore, and it's doing a thing. It's doing a thing. I thought it was fine. I know, like, some people love this for that. That's not necessarily what I'm looking for in a story. I like things that are a little bit more on the psychological side and not just brutality and killing, but I can see the draw of this one. I probably wouldn't read from this author again, though, just because it's not really my style. But who knows? I could be convinced. I don't know if it's considered extreme horror, but if it's not, it's on the line, on the verge there. Less than 200 pages, so a really, really quick read, like I said. So it is up to you if you want to try this or not. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on this and see if it's just me. The next 3-star book that I want to discuss with you is The Shuddering. This is by Ania Ahlborn. This is a horror monster story. So it's set in isolation in the snow. We have this friend group who are coming together, reuniting, if you will, to have this kind of weekend away, this holiday. There was a storm coming in, and in this story, it says they only come out when it snows and nobody ever gets away. So we know there is some kind of monster, some kind of being that is out, and they come out in the snow to hunt, and we're following this older couple, very in love. Ania Ahlborn does this several times throughout, where she cuts over to new characters who swiftly and promptly die. And so I like that because it's giving us a sense of the danger in this area without necessarily killing off our main characters from the bat. The characters that we're following in the main story are twin brother and sister, Ryan and Jane. Ryan's best friend Sawyer, Jane's best friend Lauren, and then Sawyer's girlfriend. So there's 5 of them. They are in this cabin. Ryan and Jane's family is exceedingly rich, and they have this cabin. There is a lot of romance elements in this throughout. I like a romance subplot in my thriller and horror. I know some people don't. So if you don't, you may not enjoy this one, because there's definitely a lot of that tension, and that plays into who's going to protect who, and how they fight their way out of this situation. And the dynamics between this group of friends is really what keeps you entertained in between the brutal slaughters. I won't tell you who makes it out in the end, obviously, because that's spoilery, but I will say the person or persons who made it at the end were not who I was anticipating, so there's that. I didn't necessarily love the audio narrator for this one. His voice was very dry. It was giving newscaster, it was giving broadcasty, it was giving forensic files. I did kind of get used to it as the story went on. One thing I really would have liked is to have a better idea of what these monsters looked like. She did give descriptions, don't get me wrong, but it just didn't like solidify in my brain, so I couldn't have like a very distinct idea of what these things looked like, or really what their purpose was. Have they always been here? I mean, you do get the impression that they have always been there, but then again, you also get the impression that people who have lived there for years and years and years have never seen them. So why now? Why now are they coming back out to do their hunting of course, because it's snowing, and it seems to be that that happens in the snow, but surely it has snowed in the years that these people have lived here. So there are questions left unanswered. I did like how Ania Ahlborn described the relationships between the characters. Oh my gosh, my dogs. Ryan and Sawyer in particular have this moment where they're like besties, they're best bros, but they're comfortable with each other enough that they have this kind of joking fantasy about them having this lurid affair and, you know, drinking wine by firelight on a fur rug and all of these things. And they just joke around. They're comfortable with each other in that way. I like that description of non-toxic masculinity. You know, I can tell that this was written by a woman, so I did enjoy that. A lot of people in the reviews are saying that they found these characters really annoying, just in general, annoying characters, and I get that. I totally do. It did not bother me, and I do agree, like, they can be annoying at times, but also, like, that's where the drama's coming from. That's where the suspense is coming from. That's where we're getting all of these kind of little bits of tension throughout. So I don't have a problem with that. I like an unlikable character, and that was fine with me. I thought the ending was great. I liked how it ended on this kind of creepy note. It leaves you with this feeling of like, oh, what is happening? It wasn't the most hopeful ending. So if some of you like a nice ending wrapped up, tied in a bow, then again, this may not be for you. I will say though, I enjoyed Ania Ahlborn's brother more than I enjoyed this one. Those are the only two, I think, of hers that I've read so far. And Brother is definitely ranking higher on that scale. So those of you that have read Brother, you may like this one, you may not, but I did like Brother more. All right, moving on. My next book was a 3.5 star, and that is Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. This one I do kind of lump into the same category as the Shuddering. It's like a monster horror, sort of, I guess, set in isolation in the snow. The description leads you to believe that this is only taking place in this cabin. It doesn't. It follows this couple throughout, you know, after they leave this cabin, although that is where it originated. I love the cover of this one. I think it's beautiful and terrifying. I have heard a lot of people say that this story is one that literally like shook them to their core, and I get that. But we're following this couple. What are their names? Felix and Faye. Also, why did this author give his main character his own name? I think that's a little bit weird, slightly narcissistic. I hope there's a reasoning for that. I don't know. If I remember correctly, I feel like there was an author's note in this one that may have explained that. There was an author's note that explained a lot of the indigenous or Native American lore that was associated with this book, if I remember correctly, and I appreciated that from this author. I felt a great sense of sensitivity from this author as far as treading that ground, as he is not a Native American or indigenous man. So I give him respect for that. But we're following this couple. They're engaged. They're going to this weekend away in this cabin in the middle of nowhere. And Faye, she talks in her sleep. She has night terrors. She sleepwalks. Faye starts hearing these voices in the woods, and the voices are kind of mimicking maybe people that they know or things like that. And so it's trying to lure them away. But the thing that scared me the most about this was what had to do with her sleeping disorder, because I am a sleep talker too. I don't have night terrors and I don't sleepwalk, but I talk in my sleep a lot. And there's one scene in particular where she is talking in her sleep, and it sounds like it's maybe not her talking, like maybe multiple entities are using her as a vessel. And that terrified me. And I really wish this would have leaned into that. And in a way it does, but it kind of skewed away from that. And we go into this whole backstory of Faye's childhood and all of these things. We're trying to figure out what this is that's haunting them. You know, it turns deadly. It turns deadly. Let's just say that. I think that's to be expected. It says this has been optioned for a film, so that's exciting. I would definitely watch the adaptation of this, and I think the adaptation could be potentially scarier. Once that kind of twist came, I guess, where it skewed away from where I thought it was going, it was just a little bit of a disappointment, but overall, I really enjoyed this one, and I do think it was scary. If you're looking for something that's just going to crawl into your nightmares. And a lot of this has to do with sleeping. So I think that adds to the scary part, because of course, if you're like reading the book, a lot of us, what do? We read it before we go to bed.
Don't read this before bed.
As it has to do with sleeping and being in that unconscious state and being infiltrated. So yeah, if you want to be scared, maybe pick this one up, maybe give it a go. All right, let's move on to my 4-star books. I'm very excited to talk to you about these. The first one that I want to talk to you about is Cackle by Rachel Harrison. This was my first Rachel Harrison, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really lovely. This, I have come to learn, is called cozy horror. And it is, that explains it perfectly. It's cozy horror. This is not horror in the sense that it's terrifying in any way. The scare level,
very low.
This is surrounding witches. So, I mean, you have to categorize this as horror, but all in all, this is almost like a coming of age story. This is very feminist. It's about this woman, Annie, who just turned 30, and her boyfriend of a long time has just broken it off with her, citing that the passion is gone and they're basically friends living together. She does not feel the same way, and she doesn't have the guts to say that. Like,
hello, I've given up so much for you.
It's an inner battle within herself. We are seeing her come into her own. We are seeing her kind of grow into a better version of herself, which I think is so inspiring. So anyway, she has to move because they live together. So she moves to this small town. She gets a job in New Jersey, I think. And in this little quaint town, think of Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls, kind of like that. Everybody knows each other. There is this other woman, Sophie, who everyone in the town thinks might be a witch. And Sophie takes a liking to Annie off the bat. So they are building this friendship, but Annie's also getting all of this feedback from the townspeople like,
don't go there, girl, stay away, she's bad news.
And everyone talks to Sophie like they're afraid of her. So what has happened? Is Sophie evil? Or is she not? Is she just misunderstood? And is her influence on Annie going to be a positive or a negative thing? What are we going to take out of this? So Annie is just going through, she is a self-described boyfriend girl. Like, she always has a boyfriend. She's not comfortable being by herself. And even when they break up, she's still clinging on to this ex. She's still trying to be friends with him. And Annie is forced to reconcile with the root of her insecurities. She has to confront the fact that she has spent most of her life believing that her value comes from suppressing anything that is self-serving at all. And I think a lot of us have felt that. And so I think that's why this is so incredibly relatable. I think if you identify as an outcast or an other or different or strange in any kind of way or insecure, you are going to root for Annie and you are going to just want her to like come out on top on this. It is a very satisfying ending. I really enjoyed this one, and so I'm excited to read more from Rachel Harrison. I've heard really good things about Such Sharp Teeth. I haven't heard much feedback about her newest, Black Sheep, but I'm still very interested in that. I'm sad because I had that in my library, from my library, the audiobook, and it got returned before I could get to it, so now I'm on a wait list again. But it is what it is. My next 4-star book that I want to talk to you about is a little different for me. I went on a journey this month, and you know what? I decided to pick up a fantasy book. I got it from my library, and so I was like, you know what? I have heard really good things about this. I want to check it out. I'm intrigued. And I thought I was over my romance fantasy phase with Sarah J. Maas and all of that. Turns out maybe I'm not. I had a really good time reading Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I knew that the new book was coming out. In fact, I thought the second book was already out, and now I'm kind of disappointed that I have to wait another few days here in order to read the second book because I am in it. I went into this knowing absolutely nothing about this other than it's like romance fantasy. And I would consider this new adult because they're like 20-ish, in the early 20s at least. I didn't even know going into this that there were dragons involved, but there are definitely dragons involved. This is giving Divergent. It's giving Game of Thrones with the dragons. It's giving Hunger Games. It's giving all of your dystopian realness. And that's what I love about this, because I love a good dystopian. This is like a military dystopian, and we're following Violet, who is 20 years old. In this world, once you reach a certain age, you have to join a faction of the military. There are the scribes, there are the riders, and there are the infantry, and then the healers, right? So that's where we're kind of getting the divergent pieces from. Violet has grown up training to be a scribe, which is a person who studies history, is in the library, all of those good literary, bookish vibes from that. But last minute, she now has had 6 months to prepare to be a rider, a dragon rider. Her mother is also the general of their militia, I think. Commander, general. I do not know military terms, y'all. I don't. So I feel like if I did, I would have understood more of this, but I don't. Her brother was killed in action, and she has an older sister, Mira, who is a badass rider as well. But Violet's frail. She's small, she's frail. No one expects her to be able to get through training, to live through training, even long enough to mate.
No, they don't call it mate.
What do they call it?
Bond.
With a dragon. Wow, I'm doing a shitty job of explaining this. I feel like I could have predicted everything from the beginning. This is so tropey, but it's so satisfying, which is why I understand why this has become so popular. It feels like a guilty pleasure. Obviously, there's some romance in there. I won't tell you with whom, but I will say, okay, there is a character, Dane, I think is his name, that is Violet's best friend. He's a year older. They've known each other since they were like 5 or 6 years old. So he is kind of her Gale. When she goes to the school, she sees him there, but we kind of get dumped in right at the beginning, like her first day at school or military camp, whatever the hell it is. We don't really get any details about her relationship with, Dane. She says, hey, we're best friends. And for the rest of the book, they're having difficulties with their relationship. And there's a lot that goes into that as well. I wish we had gotten some scenes of them connecting when they were younger, because I didn't necessarily feel that bond between them at the beginning. Also, like I said, there is a romance bit, and that comes in about 75% into the book, the sex scenes anyway. And I felt like I lost interest a little bit after that, because there was no more of that tension. Like, I wanted to keep that tension. I loved the tension in this. And that's what I love about romances in general. It's just that like,
will they, won't they? Oh my gosh, I can't wait for it to happen.
Because of that, I was engaged. I was engaged from the very beginning, the second this started, because I knew who that love interest was going to be, and I knew where that was going to go. There are certain things that I did not see coming. I did watch, if y'all are interested, Daniel Green. He has a video where he reads the first chapter, a chapter in the middle, and a chapter at the end as he gets drunk, and he predicts all of the things that he missed out on. And I thought it was hilarious, and he actually did a pretty good job predicting it. I would maybe read the book first and then watch that, because there's probably spoilers in there. But nonetheless, it ended on this
Big whopper.
I need to know. I need to know what happens. I need to know. I gave this 4 stars because of that lack of backstory between her and Dane, and also the kind of like slower pacing towards the end where I lost interest a little bit. But generally, this was so incredibly satisfying, and I feel like I need to be broader with the kind of books that I read, because I have kind of pigeonholed myself into this thriller and horror, and I do get enjoyment from other types of books as well. So I am going to try to be more open to that in the future, as far as maybe reading some more fantasy from time to time, more science fiction, even maybe some more romance, because I do feel like that could be a good, refreshing departure from the kind of books that I do typically read, and give me a little bit more well-rounded bookdom, if you will. It's not one that's like gonna be this great literary masterpiece, but it's very formulaic, but it's so satisfying. So I would definitely recommend Fourth Wing if you've not read it yet, and I cannot wait for Iron Flame, which may already be out by the time this video airs. Oh, there is magic in here as well. Each rider, once they bond with a dragon, they acquire a signet power, and it's different. It's based on the bond between that individual person and that individual dragon who chooses them, and so everyone has their own distinct powers. It's just a lot of fun. It's fun. I do have a feeling though that the next one is going to be even more military, more mist and fury than Court of Thorn and Roses. So I don't know if I will enjoy it as much, but nonetheless, I am very excited to read it. Next, we're going to move on to my 4.5 star book. I have one 4.5 star book this month, and that is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Now, this one is another short one. Let me see how long it is. 292 pages. That's actually longer than I thought it was, because it was such a quick read. Interesting. Anyway, this one is following the wife or the bride of Dracula. This is set in
Old timey-wimey.
it spreads from like the 1400s to the 1900s, and so there's a lot of space in there. As far as the atmosphere, the scene, it's giving Addie LaRue, it's giving Slewfoot. So if you like both of those books, I think you would really enjoy this one. This tends to be on the more literary side. I want to say this is cozy horror too, because it's not necessarily like horror in the sense that you would expect it to be. But it's not cozy at all, because this is very much about abusive relationships. So I would say that they are using vampirism as a way to kind of make this story different, but generally what we're reading about is abuse. So if that's a trigger for you, please look into that before you read this, because there are a lot of red flags. The abuse escalates as we go on. Despite the fact that I was reticent that this did feel kind of old-fashioned to me, I really, really loved what this book had to say. I loved where it went. I loved these characters. We are following Constanta, who is Dracula's bride, and a couple other consorts who they kind of pick up over the ages, over the years, and they build this family. Dracula he loves his family. He has sired his family. He loves them, but he's also in control in a way that strips them of their freedom. And not only that, but like I said, that control does escalate. And so Constanta found herself in a position where she has to choose between her love of Dracula, her family, and her freedom. As she's writing this to Dracula, she is kind of explaining why she's done the things that she's done.
What's that thing that serial killers write when they like explain all of their things? They're like, this was my belief and this was this. What is that called?
It's gonna bother me. I'll put it down here. But she's writing this thing and kind of explaining why she has behaved the way that she has. So we're learning about this after the fact. One quote in here that I really liked was, "It would be easier if he hated us," she said, "but he loves us all terribly. And if we go on letting him love us, that love is going to kill us. That is what makes him so dangerous." And I feel like that is the root of so many abusive relationships, is that there is that love there, but that love is not healthy. And if you continue to accept that, it helps understand why people who are in abusive situations stay in abusive situations. And so I think you can actually get a lot out of this book if you're looking for something that has a little more depth of meaning, but it also, is horrific in the sense that it is real. Like, this stuff happens every single day. It's happening right now in several places around the world, just like hundreds of places, thousands, millions probably. It is scary in that fact, but it's not horrifying in the way that you think of typical horror, if you know what I mean. But I really, really loved this story. I ended up just falling for it and just really getting into it. And I think it has a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. And I would definitely recommend this one. And we have one last book to discuss in this wrap-up video, and that was my one and only 5-star book of this month, and probably one of my favorites of the year. This was my most anticipated book of the year. It was a 5-star prediction. It was 5 stars. That is Rouge by Mona Awad. Now, I don't think everyone's gonna love this one as much as I do. I don't think everyone is going to be as into this as I am. So you have been warned. This is really surrealistic. It's weird. It's exactly what I expect from Mona Awad. If you've read Bunny by her, then you understand. This was the Midnight Society Book Club's pick for October. So if you're interested in a really detailed description and multiple perspectives, go back and watch that live show. I'll link it above and below. You can always rewatch the live shows. And before I forget to mention it, for the month of November, we are going to be reading Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. So go ahead and get that checked out from your library. It just came out on October 31st. So we're reading that this month. can't wait for that. Anyway, back to Rouge. This is said to be Eyes Wide Shut meets Snow White. There are a lot of fairy tale elements to this that I really, really loved. There is a kind of a culty spa in here. And this I would consider a beauty horror or wellness horror. And it's exploring the ways in which we as women are expected to look, can become obsessed with our looks, obsessed with youth and vitality. And we're following Belle. This is super French too. Mona Awad is from Montreal. And a lot of this actually, like, I feel like it's her. Like, Belle is her. In a way, she's from Montreal as well. Her mother is French-Canadian, her father is Egyptian, for Belle as well as Mona Awad. So she looks different than her mother. Her mother is said to have red hair, fair skin, and she sees her as something that she can never be, something that she can never accomplish because she doesn't look like her. So we do take into account how whiteness comes into play as far as beauty. Belle is having a hard time. She's obsessed with this YouTube personality that just talks about, you know, her face. Like, she's got a very strict morning routine, a night routine that takes like an hour each time, and she's just like peeling off her skin every day. She's watching these YouTube videos. She's obsessed. Her mom, who she has become estranged from, she finds has died unexpectedly. And so she goes leaves Montreal, goes to, I think, Miami or somewhere in Florida, maybe?
No.
California, La Jolla, which I have been to. I've been to La Jolla, and she did such a great job describing La Jolla because it's very much like old money and very pretty people and refined and right on the coast. And it's a beautiful scenery. So she goes to La Jolla for her mom's funeral, at which she meets this woman in red who gives her this business card to some kind of spa that's in this mansion on the side of a cliff, and Belle becomes intrigued, to say the least. I don't want to get too far into the plot of this, but it gets really weird. It gets very surrealistic. There is a lot of mother-daughter stuff, which I just completely fell head over heels for. I have heard others say that this got a little bit slow in the middle for them. I did not feel that way. I was in it and I could not stop. But that, again, is just me. It does get a little strange. You have to suspend your disbelief if you want to enjoy this one, I think, the way that it's intended to be enjoyed. This is not going to be one of those things where just everything's explained and you understand what's happening. No, you're not going to know what the hell is going on. It gets into this really, really dark, culty side of things. There are magical elements. There's a magic mirror, a la Snow White. And there's a lot of Tom Cruise, which is just weird and funny and like, why? I don't know. I think Mona Awad is brilliant. I love her writing. I think this is gorgeous. My expectations ended up being correct, and I'm so happy to say that. It's just so referential of this time that we're living in now. I feel like a lot of people could get a lot out of this. It's not super, like, when you think of fairy tale like Snow White, you think that it's going to be quaint and pretty. It's not. It is pretty. There are a lot of like really lush imagery in here, especially in the spa. And so you kind of have these magical elements, but other than that, we are in the real world, but not. Highly recommend, 5 stars. Like, honestly, obsessed. And that's going to be it for me today. If you all watched this to the end, why don't you give me a rose emoji down in the comments. This month I am also going to be reading for sure Nestlings by Night Cassidy for my book club, the Midnight Society Book Club. Check out the Instagram. That's where you're going to have all the information. I'm also going to be reading Midnight is the Darkest Hour, I think it's called, the new Ashley Winstead, which I think is some kind of vampiric thing as well, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to be reading that with Jessie from Reading with Jess for her book club, Sleep When I'm Dead. And we're actually going to have Ashley Winstead join us on a live. It's going to be another great month, and I can't wait. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate you so much. Don't forget that life is short, so read Wryly. Cheers, and goodbye.